Reporting live from Wrongful Convictions Weekly, my name is Mackenzie Duclos, and I am covering the tragic wrongful conviction story of Simon Marshall, an innocent man who was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and intellectual disability. A man who falsely confessed to the rape of 15 different individuals. The case began in 1997, where Quebec's Sainte-Foy Police Department was on the hunt for the Sainte-Foy rapist. After nearly 2 years and over 30 sexual assaults being committed in the Sainte-Foy area, the police department had had enough. They needed to find the perpetrator. Yet, despite the number of sexual assaults that had been occurring in the Sainte-Foy area, the police didn't even have enough information to create a composite sketch of the man who had stalked and attacked so many women. Until one night, on January 3rd, in 1997, where it all changed. Let's take a look at how this all happened.
Hi, yes, please come to the subway immediately. There's some creeper trying to look under the stalls in the girls' washroom, and they're all getting really creeped out by it.
And this is where it all began. Simon Marshall was caught peeping stalls in a local Subway restaurant. The police were called. Constables Natalie Blett and Roger Furlan arrived shortly after, arresting Simon for voyeurism. He said he did not need a lawyer and that he was not a pedophile. This led to the car ride. While passing by a location where a sexual assault had occurred, Constable Furlan asked Simon about the location. To his surprise, Simon said he had sexually assaulted someone there, but that she consented. Constable Blett became puzzled about Marshall's response. She did not know if he was lying, or bragging, or being serious. Now, would you not question this? Let's take a step back here for a second. Simon Marshall is confessing to a crime based on a police officer pointing to a location where a sexual assault had occurred, yet was not blaming Marshall for anything that happened there, and Marshall is already admitting to this crime and saying that she consented. Something seems a little bizarre here, but let's take a look at the interrogation now. Upon arriving at the police station, Constable Furlan and Sergeant Raymond Matt interrogated Simon. They believed Simon had given up information about the victims that had not yet been disclosed before to the public, in addition to prompting Marshall about some information they had already known about. The information Marshall gave was that one girl was on her period, another girl was wearing a Walkman, and that the third woman's flat was broken into by a man that believed he went into the wrong house. Is this not police misconduct? The police already knew about this information. They lied and said it was new information to incriminate Marshall. Interrogators are supposed to get to the bottom of an investigation, not prompt suspects about information they already know about and put words into their mouths. Later in 2004, Le Soleil newspaper conducted an investigation to find that information about the sexual assaults was given to the public before Marshall's confession, meaning it was not new information at all. But where were Marshall's parents during all this? Marshall had an intellectual disability, yet he was 22 years old at the time. Should his parents not have been called? The police decided to use his vulnerability against him, which led to his confessions about something he did not even do. Let's talk a little bit about the defendant. Marshall had trouble learning. He completed grade 9 at 20 years old. He was taking antipsychotic drugs and had been receiving psychiatric care for his behavioral problems ever since 1992. He had been diagnosed as schizophrenic, and he was living on social assistance. Yet before the trial, Dr. Richard Laliberté examined Marshall and concluded he was fit to stand trial and that he was a danger to society. But was he actually doing his job? Is it possible to examine a schizophrenic individual in only 10 minutes and conclude they are fit for trial, as well as being a danger to society? You would think a much more thorough assessment would be in order. especially for someone with schizophrenia, considering they can be unpredictable at times. But where was Marshall's lawyer during all this? George Amijo was Marshall's lawyer. He said that he felt there was very little he could do to keep Marshall out of prison. He said Marshall insisted on pleading guilty to 13 counts of sexual assault, breaking and entering, and uttering threats for attacks on 9 different women. He even believed that Marshall was guilty. In regards to the description, he said, it all matched. The height, the weight, the way he acted. But what about the victims? Interestingly enough, none of the victims were able to identify Marshall as the attacker, and one victim believed that he wasn't even the attacker at all. But let's take a look at some evidence that went against Marshall's conviction. For one, his psychiatrist Dr. Sylvain Faucher testified that Marshall had melodramatic, histrionic personality, which manifested as a craving for attention or a desire to impress people. Now let's take a look back at the car ride. Maybe Marshall was trying to impress the cops all along, and kept confessing to things because he didn't want the attention to stop. But did he possess the mental capacity to foresee the results of his histrionic actions? Most likely not. Another supporting evidence against his conviction was probation officer Susan Lammy. At the sentencing hearing, Lammy testified that Marshall tended to make up stories and bid for attention, and an eagerness to please people, and that he would tell people what he thought they wanted to hear. She also said even in the same conversation he could say 2 contradictory things within 15 minutes. You could almost make him say anything. Even Marshall himself was supporting evidence against his conviction. He would deny that he was responsible for the crimes he was being charged with, and then later change his mind and say he was responsible for them. Who in the right mind would go back and forth and contradict themselves constantly throughout interrogation? Not many people. But unfortunately this was not enough. Marshall received 5 years in prison in addition to the 11 months he already served in remand. Judge Rousseau thought Marshall should be sent to a detention center for treatment, but instead he was sent to a federal penitentiary. Before returning, let's take a brief commercial break. Sorry for the following interruption, but if you have any information regarding the wrongful conviction of anyone you might know, please call the number below immediately so we can work on getting something figured out for this individual. Again, if you have any information at all, regarding the wrongful conviction of any individual that you may know, please call the number below immediately. Welcome back. Let's take a look more into the investigation of Simon Marshall. Life behind bars was tough for Marshall. He applied for parole 3 times, yet was denied every single time. Even assaults similar to those for which Marshall was convicted for occurred in St. Foy during his incarceration, but received little publicity. He remained in prison from 1997 to 2003. Should the police not have questioned these assaults? While another individual was committing assaults similar to the ones Marshall falsely confessed to, he was being beaten and sodomized by other inmates in the penitentiary. He was also scalded with boiling water. He soon began to spend up to 23 hours in his cell. He didn't want to leave, and the only person he would talk to was the chaplain. The police should have investigated these assaults because of their similarities to the ones Marshall was wrongly imprisoned for, but they failed to do so because they were under the notion that they had caught the St. Foy rapist. When Marshall was released from prison, it was absolutely traumatizing. It was said that he was left in a catatonic state preceding his incarceration. His mother said that he hears voices. He won't talk. He was even hospitalized under psychiatric care. But this was not the end for Marshall. A few months after Marshall was released from prison, another sexual assault occurred where a man wielding a knife forced a young woman to perform oral sex on him in an elevator. Marshall's social worker, who he confided in, linked the information to 2 recent sexual assaults and picked up Marshall and took him to the police station for interrogation. And once again, Marshall confessed to the 2 sexual assaults that had recently occurred. Marshall even told the interrogators that he used a knife in the elevator. This led Marshall to being the only suspect in the investigation of the two recent sexual assaults that had occurred because of his false confession. So, sentence number 2. He was arrested on August 8, 2003 for 3 more counts of sexual assault and was jailed as a result. The Crown requested that he be labeled as a dangerous offender. This would have meant life in prison. But then everything started to unravel when the 2 victims of the elevator attack did not recognize Marshall, just like all of the previous victims did not recognize him in 1997 as well. Sperm collected from the elevator was tested and did not match that of Marshall. So Marshall hadn't really committed these acts of sexual assault. He falsely confessed to them. So this obviously casted doubt on other crimes he confessed to in 1997. Police Chief Daniel Langlet ordered that an investigation be conducted. He did not want the St. Foy police to review their own work, so he made the Sûreté du Québec investigate the attacks of 1995 and 1996. It was found that the original DNA from the 1995 to 1996 crimes was never actually tested, and when testing the sperm from an earlier case involving a 7-year-old, it was discovered that Marshall's was not even a match. So Marshall was not guilty after all. Now that we know that Simon Marshall is innocent, let's take a look at the specific reasons that led to his wrongful conviction and analyze them in detail. But why was Marshall truly wrongfully convicted? Well, number 1, false confession. Not only once, but twice Marshall had confessed to a number of sexual assaults he did not actually do. This can be linked with his intellectual disability, in addition to police misconduct. The police never actually tested Marshall's DNA from his first conviction. The police abused their authority by taking advantage of an intellectually disabled suspect, prompting him with leading questions. The police had made false accusations based on Marshall's bizarre willingness to admit to the crimes. Sergeant Matt was actually investigated and found guilty of false accusation in one of the cases relating to Marshall, but he was already retired, so no sanctions were implemented. The only sanctions that would even be imposed upon Sergeant Matt would be a warning or dismissal. Is this even punitive enough for someone who is partially responsible for sending someone to prison? The police also had tunnel vision. They failed to investigate any other individuals after Marshall confessed. They believed that they had caught the perpetrator and closed the case without investigating it any further. Even when he was in prison with similar sexual assaults occurring in the St. Foy area, the police disregarded this, thinking they had the right perpetrator all along. But what else? Well, falsified forensic evidence. The police never actually tested Marshall's DNA to compare it to the samples they obtained from the investigations in 1995 to 1996. If tested when questioning Marshall as a suspect, the results would have exonerated him and excluded him from any further investigation. But the police also had community pressure. They were under pressure to obtain a conviction after over 30 sexual assaults had occurred in only 2 years. The police needed to find someone to let the citizens of the St. Foy area sleep without fear of the St. Foy rapist. Marshall's intellectual disability was also a factor. It led him to be vulnerable as a suspect who falsely confessed to multiple crimes. This was undermined and overlooked throughout the entire investigation. Ineffective defense was another reason. Marshall's lawyer stated that there was nothing he could do to keep him out of jail. He did not provide any expert witness testimony to provide support of Marshall's intellectual handicap. He also failed to use a defense of mental defect. He even thought Marshall was guilty. The details were also overlooked. The assaults continued while Marshall was in prison, yet the police did not even think to relate this back to Marshall, considering he already confessed everything. None of the victims even recognized Marshall, yet this was not heavily weighted at trial because of his confession. Expert testimony was also an issue. Dr. Richard Laliberté did not do a thorough job of examining Marshall. He was clearly not fit for trial considering he was schizophrenic, and Dr. Laliberté examined Marshall in only 10 minutes. This was extremely unacceptable and very unprofessional. So overall, it was not just one factor that contributed to Simon Marshall's wrongful conviction. It was a series of unacceptable police practices, in addition to judicial errors, ineffective defense, faulty expert testimony, and worst of all, Simon Marshall's false confession due to police coercion and his intellectual disability. Simon Marshall was awarded $2.3 million for being wrongfully convicted of 15 counts of sexual assault. In my personal opinion, I don't believe that's enough. I don't think any amount given to any person that's been wrongfully convicted of anything will ever be enough. Nothing will compensate for what they went through. The only thing that will is stopping wrongful convictions from occurring. So let's work together and stop wrongful convictions from happening. Let's make sure that police are doing their job. Let's make sure that they're not engaging in any unethical behavior. Let's make sure that they don't have tunnel vision. Let's make sure that they don't withhold evidence from the defense. And let's just hope that we can solve this once and for all, because we don't want this to ever happen again.